There are actors, and then there are artists. The difference is not talent. Hollywood has never been short of talent. The difference is something harder to name, a willingness to disappear completely into a role, to find the humanity in characters that exist nowhere near the center of the human experience, to make you believe absolutely in people who could not possibly exist. John Christopher Depp II has spent his entire career on the far edge of that distinction. He played a man with scissors for hands who had never been touched. He played a pirate who moved like he was always slightly drunk and always completely in control. He played Ed Wood, the worst director in Hollywood history, with such tender affection that you wanted to love Ed Wood too. He played Hunter Thompson with Thompson's own blessing, having lived in his basement to prepare for the role. He played Sweeney Todd and sang the revenge aria of a broken barber with a voice that silenced critics who had never taken him seriously as a musician. He is, by any serious measure, one of the most gifted character actors of his generation. He is also, by any honest measure, one of the most complicated human beings Hollywood has ever produced. His story is not a simple one. It is not a clean rise and fall narrative. It is messier than that, more human, more painful, and ultimately more triumphant. This is the full life story of Johnny Depp, from the beginning. June 9th, 1963, Owensboro, Kentucky. John Christopher Depp II was born the youngest of 4 children to John Christopher Depp Sr., a civil engineer, and Betty Sue Palmer, a waitress and homemaker. The family was working class, stretched thin, and, by Johnny's own account, given under oath decades later, deeply troubled. They moved constantly. Kentucky gave way to Florida when Johnny was 7 years old following the death of his grandfather. And from that point forward, the Depp family was in motion. More than 30 different residences by the time Johnny was a teenager. A childhood lived out of boxes and motel rooms and temporary addresses. His father was largely absent emotionally, not cruel, but not present in the ways that matter. His mother, Betty Sue, was a different story. In 2022, testifying at length in a Fairfax County courtroom in Virginia, Johnny Depp described his childhood in words that were precise and devastating. His mother, he said, was violent and cruel. She threw ashtrays, she struck the children with whatever was nearby, a high-heeled shoe, a telephone, an ashtray sailing across the room. The children lived in a state of permanent anxiety, never knowing when the next eruption would come. In our house, he testified, we were never exposed to normalcy. He also testified that he began smoking cigarettes at age 12, that he began using marijuana around the same time, that these were not rebellious choices, but survival mechanisms, ways of managing the anxiety of a home that was never safe. He loved his mother. He said that too. The complexity of loving someone who hurts you is one of the defining themes of Johnny Depp's entire life, and it started here in a cramped Florida home before anyone outside of Owensboro had ever heard his name. At 15, his parents divorced. His father left, and Betty Sue, whatever her faults, was the parent who stayed. Johnny Depp dropped out of high school at 16. He had a plan. He was going to be a rock star. The guitar had always been there. From an early age, Johnny had taught himself to play, sitting with an instrument the way other kids sat with books, finding something in the strings and the chords that he could not find in the chaos of his family life. Music was order. Music was control. Music was a language he understood instinctively. He joined a band called The Kids. They played the Florida club circuit, bars and venues, grinding through the kind of early career obscurity that either kills a musician's ambition or hardens it into something real. The Kids were good enough to believe in themselves, good enough to make a decision. They moved to Los Angeles. Johnny Depp was in his late teens, living on the promise of music in a city full of young people with the same dream and a fraction of the space for all of them to succeed. He sold ballpoint pens over the phone to pay rent. He slept on floors. He did what young people do in Los Angeles when they arrive with nothing. They kept moving, and they didn't look down. The kids did not make it. The band drifted apart as the reality of Los Angeles imposed itself on the dream they had carried from Florida. But before they disbanded, Johnny Depp met a woman who, indirectly, would change everything. Her name was Lori Ann Allison. She was a makeup artist, 5 years older than Johnny, working in the music industry. They fell in love in the way that young people fall in love when they are both a little lost and a little desperate. Fast, completely, and with more feeling than wisdom. On December 20th, 1983, Johnny Depp married Lori Ann Allison. He was 20 years old. She was 25. The marriage lasted less than 2 years, but it gave him something that would outlast the relationship by decades. Lori Allison had a friend, a young actor who was beginning to make a name for himself in Hollywood. His name was Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage looked at Johnny Depp and saw something. Not just a handsome face, Hollywood was full of those. Something else, a quality of attention, a stillness beneath the restlessness, the kind of presence that a camera finds and holds on to, even when the actor hasn't been trained to give it anything specific. Cage suggested that Johnny audition for a project, a low-budget horror film from a director named Wes Craven. The film was called A Nightmare on Elm Street. Johnny Depp, 21 years old, ex-rock musician, ballpoint pen salesman, newly separated from his wife, walked into that audition with no formal training and no real plan. He got the part. His role was small, a teenager who is consumed by his own bed in a scene that remains one of the more memorable deaths in 1980s horror. He was not the lead, he was barely a supporting player, but he was on screen. He was in a film. And something in the experience, the collaboration, the storytelling, the creative environment of a set connected with something in him that music had never quite reached. He began pursuing acting seriously. More roles followed, small, forgettable parts in low-budget films. He was learning by doing, which is how many of the best actors learn. And he was watching, taking it all in, beginning to understand that acting, done right, was not performance, it was disappearance. Then, in 1987, a television producer named Patrick Hasberg came looking for a young actor with a specific quality. Someone who could convincingly play a baby-faced undercover cop. Someone who looked young enough for high school, but had enough depth to anchor a weekly drama. He found Johnny Depp. And Johnny Depp, reluctantly, became a television star. 21 Jump Street, the teen idol he never wanted, 1987 to 1990. 21 Jump Street premiered on the fledgling Fox network in 1987. It was a police procedural built around a simple, ingenious concept, a unit of young-looking cops who go undercover in high schools and colleges to investigate crime. Johnny Depp played Officer Tom Hansen, earnest, principled, and absurdly handsome. The show was a hit, a significant one. Fox was a new network fighting for survival, and 21 Jump Street gave it something genuine, an audience. Young women, primarily, who tuned in week after week not just for the stories, but for the actor at the center of them. Teenager magazine covers, fan mail in the thousands, screaming girls outside television studios, the full machinery of manufactured teen idol culture pointed directly at a 23-year-old man who had spent his adolescence playing guitar in a band and never wanted it all. Depp was miserable. He has said so consistently in interview after interview over the years. He was not ungrateful. He understood that the show had given him a platform. But the character he was playing and the image the show was building around him felt like a cage, a beautiful, well-paid Fox network cage. He wanted to be an actor, not a pinup, not a brand, an actor. He made the show's producers' lives difficult. He pushed for more complex storylines. He lobbied for his character to evolve. He was, by multiple accounts, not easy to manage because he had a genuine creative vision for himself that was incompatible with what the show needed him to be. By 1990, after 4 seasons, he was done with it. And waiting on the other side of that exit, almost as if it had been arranged by some generous force in the universe, was Tim Burton. Tim Burton had a script about an unfinished artificial man, a creature who had been built with love but left incomplete, with scissor blades where his hands should have been, a being of extraordinary gentleness and creativity who could never touch anything he loved without destroying it. It was, in every possible sense, a Tim Burton film. Depp was not the obvious choice. He was the teen idol from 21 Jump Street. He had no major film credits. Tom Cruise had reportedly been considered, Jim Carrey, Tom Hanks. Depp wanted the role desperately, actively campaigned for it, and in a detail that since has become one of Hollywood's.
Chapter 7. Captain Jack Sparrow and the Billion-Dollar Franchise, 2003 to 2011. In 2003, Disney, a studio not typically associated with risk, made an unusual bet. They greenlit a big-budget film based on a theme park ride, Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl, and they hired Johnny Depp to play the lead. What Disney did not fully anticipate was what Johnny Depp was going to do with that role. Captain Jack Sparrow, as conceived by Depp, was not the swashbuckling hero the studio had imagined. He was something far stranger, a pirate who moved as if gravity had a personal grievance with him, who spoke in ellipses and tangents, who was simultaneously the most competent and most chaotic person in any scene, and who seemed to be operating on some internal logic that only made sense to him. Depp modeled the character famously on Keith Richards, the Rolling Stones guitarist, whose relationship with conventional physical coordination has always been its own kind of performance art. Disney executives reportedly watched early footage and panicked. Was he drunk? Was the character supposed to be gay? Was this going to ruin the film? It did not ruin the film. It made the film. Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl grossed $654 million worldwide. It earned Johnny Depp his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor for a performance in a Disney pirate movie, which remains one of the more surprising developments in Oscar history. The franchise expanded. Dead Man's Chest in 2006, At World's End in 2007, On Stranger Tides in 2011, each film grossing hundreds of millions of dollars. The combined box office of the franchise exceeded $4 billion. At his peak, Johnny Depp was being paid $20 million per picture, making him one of the highest-paid actors in the history of Hollywood. His films had collectively grossed more than $8 billion worldwide. The boy from Kentucky who sold ballpoint pens to pay rent in Los Angeles had become one of the most commercially powerful performers on the planet. And yet, the most important thing that happened to him in this entire period was not on a film set. It was in a hotel corridor in Paris in 1998, where he met a French singer named Vanessa Paradis. Chapter 8. Vanessa Paradis, Family, and the Life He Built in France, 1998 to 2012. Vanessa Paradis was already famous in France before Johnny Depp knew who she was. A singer and actress of considerable talent, she had been a public figure since her teens. She was artistic, private, and entirely unimpressed with Hollywood fame in the way that certain Europeans can manage. They met. They fell, and unlike the relationships that had come before, the tabloid love affairs, the high-voltage couplings with other famous people, this one was different from the beginning. They did not get married. That detail confused people who expected a love story to follow a conventional shape, but they built something that most married couples spend their entire lives searching for: a genuine life.
They bought a property in the south of France, a village in Provence. They renovated it. They planted a garden. Johnny Depp, the man who had grown up in 30 different residences before his 18th birthday, found a place and stayed. They had 2 children. Lily Rose Melody Depp was born in 1999. She would go on to become an actress and model of serious accomplishment in her own right. John Christopher Depp III, known as Jack, was born in 2002. By all accounts, this was the period of Johnny Depp's greatest personal contentment. He was present for his children in a way that his own father had not been for him. He was connected to something outside of fame and performance, to soil, to family, to a rhythm of life that the film industry never provides. His professional life remained extraordinary. The Pirates films, the Burton collaborations, Finding Neverland in 2004, for which he received another Oscar nomination, Sweeney Todd in 2007, which silenced anyone who had doubted his musical abilities. But quietly, and this detail matters, the spending was also extraordinary. Later, in legal proceedings, the full scale of his expenditure would become part of the public record. At the height of his earning power, Depp was reportedly spending $2 million every month. He maintained 14 properties across multiple continents. He had a 45-acre village in France, a private island in the Bahamas, a collection of hundreds of guitars. He reportedly spent $30,000 a month on wine alone. He also paid $3 million to fire Hunter S. Thompson's ashes from a specially constructed cannon, as Thompson had requested. That one, at least, makes perfect sense if you know anything about either man. The spending was not careless. It was, in a way, an expression of everything he had not had as a child: the stability, the beauty, the ability to give the people he loved whatever they needed. But it was also unsustainable. And when the income eventually slowed, for reasons that were still years away, the gap between what he had and what he owed would become impossible to ignore. In 2012, after 14 years together, Vanessa Paradis and Johnny Depp separated. Both were private about the reasons. Both spoke afterwards with evident, genuine affection for the other and for the family they had built. It was an ending without a villain, which made it, in its own way, one of the saddest endings in a life that had already known several. He was 50 years old. His children were 13 and 10. His house in Provence was still there. And somewhere in his social circle, a young actress named Amber Heard had begun to orbit closer. Chapter 9. Amber Heard, the relationship that destroyed everything, 2012 to 2016. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard met on the set of The Rum Diary in 2011. She was 25, he was 47. They began a relationship that would become, in ways that neither of them could anticipate, one of the most consequential and destructive in the history of celebrity, not because of what it produced, but because of what it revealed, about both of them, about the industry around them, about the Internet's relationship with truth. They married on February 3, 2015, at their home in Los Angeles, in a small private ceremony. Amber Heard, by any objective measure, was a rising star, beautiful, ambitious, politically engaged, an actor of genuine presence. Johnny Depp, by that point, was a man carrying more weight than was visible from the outside. The financial pressures, the career plateau after years of extraordinary success, the substances that had always been present but were becoming more central. In May 2016, Amber Heard filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She subsequently obtained a temporary restraining order, submitting photographs that appeared to show bruising on her face and alleging that Depp had been physically violent toward her. The allegations were devastating, publicly, immediately, completely. Disney began distancing themselves. Warner Brothers, who had cast Depp as Grindelwald in the Fantastic Beasts franchise, began having conversations internally about his future in the series. And then, in 2018, Amber Heard published an op-ed in the Washington Post. She did not name Johnny Depp, but the piece, which described her experience as a survivor of domestic violence, was understood by virtually everyone who read it to be about him. The consequences were swift and severe. Chapter 10. Blacklisted, Losing Pirates, Fantastic Beasts, and His Career, 2018-2021. Disney dropped Johnny Depp from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Warner Brothers asked him to resign from the Fantastic Beasts films, a request that came with staggering timing 2 days after he won a separate legal case in the United Kingdom. In November 2020, a British judge had ruled against Johnny Depp in a libel case he had brought against the Sun newspaper, which had called him a wife-beater. The ruling found on a balance of probabilities that the characterization was substantially true. Depp appealed the ruling. The appeal was rejected. Within 48 hours of that rejection, Warner Brothers requested his resignation. He gave it. At 60 years old, Johnny Depp had been effectively removed from the 2 franchises that had defined the commercial peak of his career. He was, in the language of the industry, toxic, uninsurable, a liability. He retreated to Europe. He played guitar with friends. He painted, a pursuit that had always been private, but now became more central. He continued